Evening. Okay. Hello, everybody, again for the recording. Nice if you can join after the fact, but especially hello to everybody who is here bright and early here for me in Sussex and in the evening for you lot. So that's always very strange, isn't it? Even stranger to think you're about to go into your summer when we are welcoming the fall. So we are going to be talking about Carl Jaspers, and that is a great privilege because I don't often get invited to speak about Carl Jaspers. We were just talking about that with Alison and Adam, how neglected poor Carl Jaspers is and how unfair that is and how much of his work is so relevant to us as existential therapists and how precious it is really what he has brought to the world. So I hope you have had a chance to read the paper that Alison has sent to you, because we will be coming back to that in the second part of the session today. But I will start by kind of introducing some of Jasper's basic ideas, and then for you to start thinking about that in terms of how that might be useful to you in your own life and in your practice. So I will be starting to share some slides so that we can go straight into this. And I will, hang on. Okay, so that's our friend Carl Jaspers here, who, as you know, is an existential philosopher who actually started out his life as a doctor and a psychiatrist, and then gradually moved into working as a philosopher. So he did it the other way round to what I did in my life. I started out as a philosopher, then became a psychologist and a psychotherapist. But the fact that he brings these different strands of education is very significant, and it allows him to reach very widely and very deeply into human existence. I will be focusing particularly on his idea of limit situations, which was particularly useful in the case study that we will be talking about. I have always been quite fond of Jaspers, and I've always thought that he was much neglected. Just a few words about myself before I launch into Jaspers. This is the New School of Psychotherapy and Counseling, which I still direct, but no longer manage. The Existential Academy, which is where the New School is based in London, and which also itself offers short courses and existential therapy training and a whole host of other things. But what I am focusing most of my attention on at the moment is, well, my practice and running the low-cost clinic, but also being president of the worldwide existential movement that Alison is part of and is on the advisory board for, to make sure we take the antipodian existential therapists into account in everything we do, which is not always easy with time constraints, is it? So the existential movement is about bringing wisdom to the world. It is about taking the ideas of the existential philosophers and, instead of just applying them to psychotherapy, actually apply them to everything we do in our own lives. Okay, so here are my books. I'm pleased to say there are now 20 of them, and that is quite tiresome. But below there at the bottom is the newest one, which is coming out in February or March, which will be called Structural Existential Analysis, which is an existential form of research. But this is the one I've been now writing for 3 years, and which I am just finishing the final edit for, which will be called The Art of Freedom: Guide to a Wiser Life. And that will be drawing on some of Jaspers' ideas. That'll be another year before it goes through the press process. This book I would strongly recommend because that was edited by a number of existential therapists around the world and has a lot of important information. So that is the Wiley World Handbook of Existential Therapy. So let's see where Jaspers comes in to doing existential therapies and how he is slightly different from any of the other philosophers. So he always worked towards integrating philosophical explorations of human existence with understanding the most profound of difficulties that people have in living in the world. Because as a psychiatrist, of course, he was exposed with autism, schizophrenia, the really challenging difficulties that people deal with. And he came to believe very early on that we were approaching those in the wrong way, that we had to have a much more subjective, intense, immediate, connective way of approaching these problems. So he was all about improving our understanding, how you actually understand life and how you engage with it. And he believed that the way in which people stop understanding life or disengage with life was the main way in which things would go wrong for a person. So he aimed to approach people's problems in a more dynamic, creative, and reflective way, and to focus, as all existentialists do, on meaning and purpose. And for him, that was always about one thing and one thing only, which was the search for truth in a courageous way, not by just like a sponge absorbing so-called truths that have been declared by people, but to investigate what is actually true about any experience or anything in the world at all. So in this sense, he stands in a way with the phenomenologists, but he was not a phenomenologist. And I think this is why people don't read him at the moment, because of those 20th century philosophies, really, it was Heidegger's approach and what grew after Heidegger in Sartre and de Beauvoir and people like that, that have won the day. And what people are now neglecting is the non-phenomenological, more general philosophical approaches that are like Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and Jaspers. So I think it's timely that we go back to Jaspers and that we think about those big questions that all philosophers deal with and that Jaspers always focused on. And Jaspers took the view that philosophy should never just be about academic philosophy. It should be something that made sense to everyone. So he was into the philosophy of existence, which is why philosophers don't take him seriously. So because he falls between all those cracks, he was no longer really working as a psychiatrist. He never really got taken seriously by philosophers, and he never really made it into someone who inspired the world of psychotherapy. I think somewhat because his concepts were too philosophical and too complex and sometimes a little bit confusing, that he's not being read very much at all. So Jaspers has a philosophy that you could call a kind of existential determinism. He is very keen on establishing what is given in life. What are the things that we cannot escape from? Because nature is obviously lawful, and everything in nature is cyclical, like I was saying about, your cycles are very different to my cycles at the different sides of the world, but nevertheless, we are subject to the same cycles. We're just on the other side of them at one point in time. So these laws of nature apply to us too, and they set limits to our freedom. So this lawfulness on the one hand and the human capacity for freedom on the other hand are constantly in opposition to each other. And human consciousness, Jaspers believed, was the way in which we bring those together and make sense of the restrictions that we're working with. And in making sense of those restrictions, we can then realize our possibilities. This is quite similar to Heidegger, who of course always said that possibility is greater than actuality. Now, think about that for a moment. Possibility is always greater than actuality. There is always more possible than that which has been realized in a life. It is a kind of key to doing psychotherapy. You start with observing what is actual, and then you start opening up the kind of hidden parts of that to find myriads of possibilities that have not yet been realized, but that are there in statu nascendi, waiting to be born. So Jaspers made this a very important part of his work. In his clinical work, and you always have to remember that there are two Jasperses. So there is Jaspers the philosopher, which is very much a popular philosopher, and there is Jaspers the clinician. Jaspers as a clinician was all about showing the importance, and goes completely against current kind of rules in psychotherapy. Jaspers took the view that it was incredibly important to dare immerse yourself with your clients, to let yourself be drawn into their world and to become kind of part of it, and he used this word, to participate in it. I have always kept those words in the back of my mind ever since I found out of it. And he always has given me permission to go against the flow of what you're supposed to do. And there is no doubt in my mind that I work better if I allow myself to really care and really become part of a person's life within the boundaries of the therapeutic frame. So this is about making yourself totally immersed for those 50 minutes, working it out for yourself after the session and in supervision, and then get on with your life, but also being aware of how you are still processing your client's worldview, your client's experiences, your client's learning, which is also always your learning. And if you allow yourself to be open to that new learning that each client brings, then something new is revealed in the therapeutic sessions, but also reverberates in your own life. So Jasper's view of empathy is quite different to, say, Roger's view. It's not about keeping this line between the rational and the feelings. It is about being available completely to what is happening in that person's life and to make it your own, to really imagine it through and think, what would it be like to be in that state of mind, in that situation? And never to think you understand it, but always to verify with your client, is this what that is like? Because that is what it feels like to me. You represent the experience to yourself. You represent it, not represent it. You represent, live it, embody it in yourself. And this is how you open yourself to understanding human existence a little bit more with the explorations, the existential explorations you're doing with each of your clients. There's only one objective. It's not to cure a person. It's not just to understand them. It's to enable them to get engaged in this search for truth. And once a person is inspired with this feeling, this understanding that you are there with them, by their side, to make sense of these difficult situations, then they get inspired by the understanding that their life is actually an adventure of exploration that allows them to come to terms with all the difficulties that they thought were too much for them. So that changes the objective of therapy quite a bit. It is not about any kind of dualism. It is not about anything other than seeking truth, layer by layer, experience by experience. It is about being in dialogue and enabling people to tell the truth about themselves and to find their passion for life again. It is about helping people to find their own inner passion deeply and to take authority over their destiny and just to understand things better and think for themselves freely, responsibly, passionately, and compassionately. So just a few words about where Jaspers fits in my sort of scheme of things, of the people we draw from specifically, particularly, besides many other philosophers, of course. The philosophers of freedom, which I won't talk about, I have him down in the phenomenologists, but really, although he was informed by phenomenology, he was not a phenomenologist as such. So after the phenomenologists, you get the existentialists, the post-structuralists, and the existential humanists, amongst who you see Hannah Arendt there, who, by the way, did her research for her doctorate with Carl Jaspers. She couldn't do it with Martin Heidegger because she'd had an affair with Martin Heidegger and she needed to step away from him. And so Carl Jaspers became her supervisor for her doctorate. So here you see Jaspers in the middle of the top row, in between Heidegger and Simone de Beauvoir. A very suave person he was, and very much loved by his students. And then when we look at it from the other angle, as essential existential practitioners, you see how Karl Jaspers rated at the same time as Binswanger and Tillich. They all have very similar dates, those three. Ludwig Binswanger, Karl Jaspers, and Paul Tillich were all born in the 1880s and all died in the 1960s. They're like the triumvirate of the people who started out this whole movement of applying existential ideas to psychotherapy. And all three of them are very well worth getting to know in greater depth. Right, so now a little bit about the timeline in Jasper's life. So as you could see, he lived from 1883 to 1969, which is surprisingly recently in a way, isn't it? And he got his MD and his psychiatry degree at the University of Heidelberg in 1909, and then went on very quickly, within 4 years, to publish at the age of 30 a major work, which is called the General Psychopathology, which he carried on doing new additions on throughout his life. So this was his glorious attempt to provide an alternative to psychiatric, psychopathological categories to show that mental illness can be approached in an existential way with understanding of what is actually happening in the experience of the person rather than in a so-called scientific way where you come in from the outside and you describe symptoms and try to cure those symptoms. So he was really the forerunner of all of that. He was the person who said, we're doing it completely the wrong way. We need to connect to people in a subjective way rather than in an objective way. He was given a professorship in psychology at the University of Heidelberg in 1916. And then he changed to a professorship in philosophy, also at Heidelberg University in 1921, because by that time he had stopped really working in psychology and psychiatry, and he was really getting known as a philosopher. Now, unfortunately, in from 1933 onwards, he was marked out as a dangerous person by the Nazis. And this was because he wasn't in agreement with Heidegger's, embracing of Nazi ideas. He stood against it. And B, he was married to Gertrude Meyer, who was a Jewish woman. So Gertrude Meyer was the sister of his two best friends, Gustav and Ernst Meyer. And when he married her, this became really the story of his life because he was relieved, as we say, from his teaching duties by the National Socialists. For about 10 years, he was unable to teach, he was unable to publish. But then, of course, after the war, in 1945, when Heidelberg was liberated, he was on the white list of Americans, saying that he was one of the few German philosophers who was clearly not tainted by Nazism. So he then wrote a book about this, which is called The Question of German Guilt, which is a study of how the German people were led by the nose by the Nazis. But, he was fed up with the whole situation, and he moved to Switzerland away from Germany in 1948 with his wife Gertrude, who survived the war, and then lived in Basel ever after that. So here are Jaspers' main publications. I have said to you, the General Psychopathology. The first edition came out in 1913, so that is really quite early on, isn't it? It's well before really Binswanger had become well known with his work. It was only translated into English in 1963. And when that translation came out, Ronnie Lang, R.D. Lang, wrote a very critical précis about it and totally destroyed it, basically. And I think that is a very curious thing, because clearly Jaspers was very much in line with the sorts of things the anti-psychiatrists were trying to do later on in the 60s and the 70s. So that's always been a little controversy in the existential movement. Then he wrote an important essay, Man in the Modern Age, which is, just before he gets scuppered, really. And he worked on his philosophy, which came out in 3 books, 3 volumes in 1932. And he considers that, considered that his main work. And then a much smaller book that kind of summarized his 3 tomes of his philosophy, called Reason and Existence, in 1935. And that was translated much earlier, in 1955. And then his Existenzphilosophie, which is quite hard going, in 2 volumes. But, that was his claim to becoming a serious philosopher in 1938. Then this question of German guilt, in 1946, which is very interesting and very much in line with Hannah Arendt's thinking about all of that. And then his little book, which is a summary of his lectures, for public lectures, because he came to believe that it was his mission to spread these ideas much more widely, and it was called Way to Wisdom, and it came out in 1951. And I strongly suggest you read that. That's very easy to read, and really that will help you a lot in understanding his ideas. Now, I'm going to skip across some of his ideas quite quickly, because I think it's much more important that we grab a hold of the ideas that will be significant for you, and to start thinking about how you can use them. But we can't really do that without sort of situating Jaspers' idea a little bit more. So Jaspers has always been interested in asking primal questions, which is the same thing that Kant did or Hegel did. So he saw himself in line with people like Spinoza, Kant, and Hegel, asking the primal questions. But he said we can't be there, because our questions and answers are always determined by the view we have of the world in our current understanding of it. So what we find is truth is always very colored by that. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to pierce through that cultural impact on our understanding. We should, nevertheless, try to philosophize by going back into the basic tradition of what it means to think about the intentness, the intentionality of your own life. So this is where I would like you to start taking some notes on a piece of paper next to you. I'll get you to write down a few things for when we go into the breakout room. So think about, what is the intentness of your life? What is your objective? What is your basic purpose? If you would put that in a more Sartrean way, what is your fundamental project? What is your original project in the world? The more you exist with self-determination and the more you listen to the past, the more you will come to life. So, yes, here are a few other facts about his life. So he came from a fairly middle-class family and he lived by the North Sea in Oldenburg, which is on the North Sea at the north of Germany. Not that far from Denmark, really. And he studied at Heidelberg and Munich. He married Gertrude Meyer, told you about Gustav and Ernst. The turn from psychiatry to psychology to philosophy by 1921, very early on. The problems with his wife's status, who was supposed to be tainted as a Jew. Well, he was supposed to be tainted as a Jew for marrying a Jew. It's quite extraordinary when you go back to these stories of the 30s. It's shocking, really, how that worked. And his ban, and there was a threat of going into concentration camp. He's written a lot about this. He's written a lot about how hard it was to continue being in a loving relationship with each other when Gertrude was so afraid that he would stop loving her for this, terrible accusations that came to him because of her background. And he sometimes found it difficult not to listen to the people who said to him, why don't you separate yourself from Gertrude so that, you're not tainted anymore? But he saw it through for all those years, more than 10 years. He saw that through in a faithful way. And I think this says something about the quality of his thinking and the quality of his way of life. So this is typically what he concluded from that kind of way of life, that all living things are struggling for existence. And when you look at nature, you see the struggle in nature. When you watch nature programs, it's never just about pretty pictures, is it? When you start looking at how nature works, you see the trouble everything has to survive, and you see the desperate struggles between, predators and those who are predated on. And you see the struggle of the seasons in everything that grows in nature as well. You can even see the struggle of the tides when you look at the seas and the oceans. So everything struggles for existence, even unwittingly and unwillingly. They struggle passively just to exist, to be left in what seems to be peace and quiet, and they struggle actively to grow and expand. Now, second point I'd like you to write down for yourself. So you have written down what is your intention in life. Now I'd like you to write a little bit about your struggle in life. What have been your obstacles? What is currently in your way to your intention? Where lies your main struggle? Now think about that for a little moment. Well, I'll carry on a little bit more before I will ask you to go into your breakout rooms and to think through that a little bit. I seem to be going backwards now instead of forwards. I don't know how that happened. Very weird. Okay. So what kind of struggle is it? He said it's not just a struggle for existence, It is the struggle for the power. It is the struggle for truth. It is the struggle about what is it that matters? What is it that should win the day? What is going on here? And he came to see that there were certain things in the world which he called the ciphers, which reminded us of the things that truly mattered in the world. So when you, for instance, stand by a sunrise or a sunset, or you stand by the ocean and you ponder the vastness of the sea, or you lie on the grass at night, on a clear night, and you look at the moon and the stars, and you are in awe. These are ciphers. These are reminders that there is a wider kind of truth to things, and that it is important in our lives that we search for these ciphers, because those are our path towards truth and a reminder of why we're struggling, what the struggle is for, and what our true intentions are. And he believed that the basic questions formulated by Kant summed up that path, which he thought was the path in working with clients as well. So the Kant's questions were, what can I know? What shall I do? What may I hope? And what is a human being? So those questions, Jaspers thought, are being reborn all the time. And when we ask them, and when we keep reminding ourselves of them, or we work with our clients with those questions, then the troubles people have are set against a different frame of reference. So ask yourself, you've asked yourself, what is my intention in life? What has been my struggle that thwarts my intention? What is my search for truth? Now, ask yourself whether these questions, what can I know? What shall I do? What can I hope? And what is a human being? How are they relevant? Basically, these are the framework for a philosophy of life that you have without making it explicit to yourself, and that you use in your work. Now, I think this is a good moment to go into your breakout rooms, but for quite a short time. So I will give you 10 minutes. So be quick about it. Do a quick round. We go into groups of 3, Adam, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Groups of 3, so there are just 3 of you. So each of you take a quick turn. So you have 2 minutes, 3 minutes each to say quickly, what is your intention? What is your struggle? And what is your truth, using Kant's questions? Don't worry if you don't hit them all. It's just about setting the mood. See what you make of it. We'll come back in 10 minutes. Yeah, well, remembered, Alison, to start the recording again. So people have just come back from their breakout rooms, and we'll just have 1 or 2, maybe 3 bits of feedback about things you discovered that might be helpful to other people. So I don't need everybody to come back. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it's always nice to hear something back in the group. So if there's anybody who would like to say something that you think would be helpful to other people of what you found in your little group, please press your artificial raise hand image, or just hold your hand up, and I'm sure Adam will see you. Anybody would like to say something? Yeah, Sally Nichols. Let's hear from you, Sally.
I'll go first. I found the question really kind of big, or the questions, and sort of
They are.
took me into somewhere very personal, and I was really excited and surprised that my two group partners, Nicola and Nicole, both could find answers much more readily than I could to their purpose and or intention in life, and the struggles
that is really interesting.
that went along with that.
That is really interesting. So what are you saying? So that for you, it is a much more open-ended thing. It is like a puzzle. It's an open question that you continue to think about.
Well, what I was thinking about it was that you've given us different ways to think about the question. What is the intention, your objective, the basic purpose, the fundamental project, and I found those quite held different connotations for me.
Completely different things.
I
so
really
there are
wasn't
different
sure.
ways of looking at life. So the real exercise was about figuring out how you make sense of your world and how you look at it, and which of those questions is really with you on a daily basis, if any of them are with you on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And hopefully it will make you think about how different clients have also got different perspectives on the world. And that is
the other thing
unsaid most of the time. These are things that do not come out most of the time. They're very profound questions. You still there, Sally?
Yes. I was going to say the other thing was that I sort of thought that asking me that question, answering it today, would not be the same as if you asked me 2 days ago, or you asked me in 6 months' time, or whatever else. That there were some things that I might see as being constant. And what I felt about that was my objective of being real.
Very good. Yes.
But that the rest of it might change.
Yes, because you discover different things, and different things come to the foreground, and it's a dynamic process, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So it's an ongoing puzzle rather than something that you determine once and for all.
Yes, most definitely.
You are basically, what you're telling me is that you live the philosophical life, which is very interesting.
There you go.
There you go. And this is the essence of what Jaspers brings to the table. As I was saying to Adam in the 10 minutes, it's one of the ways in which Jaspers is so very different to Heidegger. Heidegger pontificates as a philosopher, and he tells you this is how human existence is. This is, the truth about it. What Jaspers aims to do is to get you into the mood of thinking about those issues, and to come to these issues from many different perspectives. And that's what you've just done for yourselves. And it doesn't matter, whether you gave an answer or you didn't give an answer, or whether you could answer one of them or not another one. None of that matters. What matters is that you travel towards that place in your own mind and your own life where you start to see this dimension of existence, and that when you work with people, you go to that depth wisdom rather than addressing it from the surface onwards. So it is about how you place yourself in relation to the questions your clients bring and deepen them. I see that Xenia also has had her hand up, so I'd quite like to hear from you, Xenia, as well.
Thank you, Amy, and lovely to see you. I'm actually a student at the New School. I'm doing my master's in autism and neurodevelopment. I also did a foundation at the New School, which was wonderful.
Great. But I
and
see
I'm
you
here
are from Munich.
I'm in Munich now, which is quite topical for today's session as well. So I'm originally
It
from
is
the
very
UK.
much so, because the paper that I gave you, I gave in Munich 2 months ago.
Wonderful.
At the University of Munich. Yeah, we had a seminar, a 2-day seminar where various philosophers who are experts in Jaspers came together, each of us to present our papers, which is the paper that I shared with you. So we did that at the University of Munich.
It also makes me think that existential practice is so transcendental. We're joining from all parts of the world. And me actually studying in the UK at your school and living in Germany, we're connected here with colleagues in Australia. It's just wonderful.
It's amazing. Yes, it is a coming together of people who are like-minded and who seek to make meaning in life from all over the world and coming to it from many different perspectives.
Very true. And so in terms of our conversation, so I had Leslie and Nora in my room. What was very interesting is that we arrived being a bit stuck. Maybe none of us was able to clearly state the intention. The first question, what's the intention? But somehow, wonderfully, within a few minutes, something generative has happened in the air, and each of us, we actually came out with beautiful statements, which were mostly around authenticity, good faith, some kind of process in life, not being the fixer. That's what I remember. And it was wonderful to see it unraveling in such a short period of time, which makes you think of the magic of dialogue,
The
and what
magic
comes
of
out of it.
dialogue. But what is needed is that you have a question in the room that takes you beneath the surface into those things that deeply matter to each of us, because then immediately we don't do the sort of superficial stuff. We immediately engage with each other, and that can happen very, very quickly. So that's really what this demonstration was about, how important that is, how you can so easily shift your perspective in these different directions, go under the surface and start looking at life with your client in a different way. So I think I'm going to leave that there now. That was great. I am absolutely delighted that you were all able to do that so wonderfully. And I shall now carry on with my presentation and move into talking to you. Are you still there?
Yeah, we're all still here, Emmy.
We're here.
Yeah, we're here.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't see you anymore. The image of the thing has disappeared from my screen, so it's like I'm on my own here suddenly. So we're talking about limit situations, which is kind of my little limit situation that I just experienced there, which was to think I was suddenly struggling on my own and I was going to have to find the link again and get back into the room again. But fortunately, that wasn't the case. So Jaspers made perfect sense of that sort of situation. He said there are situations which remain essentially the same, even if their momentary aspect changes and their shattering force is obscured. I must die. We all share that. I must suffer. You cannot live a life without suffering. I must struggle. You cannot live a life or even a day without some struggle. And I am subject to chance. Now, This is taken from his book Way to Wisdom. See at the bottom, Jaspers, 1951. Originally, he recognized only 4 basic limit situations, which was death, struggle, and chance. Okay, no, this is not the one I was thinking of. He has 5 later on. So these are the ones he came up with first. Death, suffering, struggle, and chance. And then there's the 5th one. Here you are. I involve myself inexorably in guilt. Now, what does he mean by that? He means that we always, through our existence in the world, impact on the world and harm things in the world. Like, when you eat things that were alive a lot of the time, unless you always eat fruit or nuts. And you also impact on the lives of other people, and therefore you're always responsible for some things that become difficult for others too. So all these fundamental situations are things that we like to forget about. We don't want to remember it. So here are the 4 ones that were basic: struggle, death, chance, and guilt. And in German, since
Emmy,
we have...
can I just interrupt? Are you supposed to be showing slides?
Yes.
We can't see them. You haven't. We can't see
See,
them.
there is something wrong. I could tell.
Okay. What happens if? What are you seeing?
Let me try to redo it.
Okay.
No, I am no longer... Yes, there we are. Let me see. Let me reshare my slides.
There you go. Yeah, we've got them now. I think. Not quite. Almost.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, we go
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. And can you see us now as well?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
back to where I
You're
should
back.
be now.
All right. Good.
I think it was from shifting from room to room. I think by me having gone into a room, I came back in the room as a participant rather than a presenter.
Ah, okay. All right.
So we need to be careful about that next time.
Yes.
Right, where were we? Right, we'll go straight to this. So here you are. Here you have your 4 limit situations, the basic ones. Kampf, struggle. We have to fight for survival, and we will suffer. So the suffering one is included in that. And then later on, he separates it out from there. Death, Tod. We all die eventually, same as Heidegger. Zufall, which is translated in various different translations with different words, sometimes as chance, sometimes as hazard. So we live with uncertainty, basically. I think uncertainty and fate. I think fate is a good translation for Zufall. And don't know what fate will bring. And then we incur guilt, as I was saying. Schuld, we engage in things that have bad consequences, and we need to be responsible for the debt we owe to the world. So these 4 things are very much not in evidence for most people. Now, if you look at Yalom's work, you will see that he took a lot of inspiration from Jaspers, especially about awareness of struggle and of death. These are the things that we should be looking for in our clients' words. Where are these things hidden? What are the ways in which people are not facing up to their struggle? How are they trying to get away living a life without struggle? Think about Frankl. One of the magic tricks that Frankl always uses is to say to people, don't try to stop struggling. Make yourself struggle more. Embrace your struggle. That is really a very Jaspersian thing to do. Become aware of your own suffering. Embrace your own suffering. Be with it instead of trying to push it down and deny it. Make it explicit. Speak about it. Understand it. Where does it come from? What part of your suffering is caused by history or by fate or by what is happening between you and other people? What part of it are you bringing about? How are you in denial of death? Ernest Becker, of course, also was very inspired by Jaspers' ideas and Heidegger's ideas, saying 90% of people spend 90% of their time pretending that they're immortal, that life will go on forever. They don't want to be aware of the passing of time. They don't want to be aware of the seriousness of life and the realization that it will be limited. And then this whole thing about chance, hazard, fate, this is something nobody else really speaks about. No other philosopher has taken that on the chin in the way Jaspers had. To be aware that a lot of the difficulties that happen in our lives are coming to us by chance. It is because of chance encounters with other people that certain vibes come into our lives or certain events happen in our lives. Stop taking responsibility for what fate has brought into your life. If you were in a concentration camp, it's nothing to do with anything you did wrong. It's historical fate, destiny that touched you in a dreadful way. Don't carry the guilt for things that are about chance, but do face the guilt for the things that are in your hands. So to distinguish between those things is a very important thing to learn to do. So I think I'm going to ask you to go back into your groups for 10 minutes and to think about these four. I hope you've written them down. What is your struggle and your suffering? How do you deal with death in your life? What is the role of chance and uncertainty and fate in your life? And where is your guilt? Again, these are four huge questions. But if you're going to work with these four basic limit situations in your work with clients, you need to do this work of facing it in yourself. So write them down. 10 minutes in your groups. See where you get to. Now we're back. People coming back from their breakout rooms, having talked about limit situations in their own lives.
Only Leslie at the moment.
Only Les at the moment, yeah.
It still
Fine,
says
fine.
breakout rooms in progress on my screen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
because they once we close in
Oh,
the
yes. 15,
seconds,
12 seconds. Yes.
now they're coming back. They're forced
Right,
back.
here we go.
Mhm.
Well, welcome back, everybody. How did you fare with your limit situations? I wonder. So, while the first time you went into your breakout rooms, you were opening your minds to different ways of looking at the universe and at your own life. This time you were thinking about these inevitable difficulties and limits that you can or might not have an open mind to, or be aware of. So how was that different? And what did you learn this time? Again, just a couple of bits of feedback. So if you think you have something to contribute to the group out of that, please show your hand now. Don't see anybody yet, so feel free to step in.
Our group member Nicole didn't get enough time, and if
Nicola, yes.
Nicole, yeah,
Nicole, okay.
you didn't get enough time, Nicole. So if you wanted to speak,
That's okay. I'll just we were reflecting on death, and my only contribution was how death was always a guest, I guess, at my table of life since I can remember, in relation to the context of my parents and grandparents who were very deeply impacted by the effects of World War II and the loss of loved ones through that. So how that narrative shaped my own feelings, struggle, thoughts in regards to death. That's the only thing I really wanted to say there. But thank you.
That's very poignant, Nicole. Can I just ask you a supplementary question to that?
Of course.
I mean, so death was a guest, and that doesn't sound like a very cheerful thing. Was there something? Yeah, that's quite an anxious thing for a child to grow up with, isn't it? I mean, it was the same.
Yeah, in retrospect, absolutely there is, and I think parents and everybody in my older immediate family, later on you get language of the understanding that everybody was suffering from PTSD and the impact that has on your formative years and the awareness of how it shapes you.
Well, but that is a kind of psychiatric way of looking at that, isn't it? So that is falling into the trap that Jaspers wants to release us from.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is looking at that differently.
Mm.
What did you gain from being forced to look death in the face in that way?
I love that question. And that is a narrative question, which I just think it's so beautiful. And I would say, I think what I gained is an appreciation of life. Really, I know that sounds really simplistic and really, short, but really, it really is that when you're aware that death, and I know that kind of sounds like a formidable guest, and I do feel it as a formidable guest, but it's an awareness of this guest. When that guest sits at your table and you realize it's there, you do look around and you do look at life very differently, I think. I think that is part of the experience.
And can you think of something that has sharpened your awareness of in life? Or you're talking about gratitude for life? Or moments?
Again, it sounds so silly, but that just came to mind in sitting and just that moment going, okay, this moment is not coming back.
Yeah.
It's that moment of
that super awareness that the moment is actually all you've got in a way, and how precious that is, and to actually live in it, to actually own it, to actually be alive, because you're going to be alive in these moments. We're not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I really love that question. Thank you. It's a real gift. It's a beautiful question. Thank you.
So that is a very powerful question always to have in your mind with your clients, following in Jaspers' footsteps. Do I help my clients most by treading the path of psychiatry and calling things out as trauma or as this and that and the other, and seeing them as trapped in these, symptoms or these problems? Or can I go beyond that and dig deeper and allow this person to actually harvest some of the things they can take from their confrontation with their limit situations? Because essentially, instead of looking at psychopathology, if you look at how a person has been confronted with limit situations and how that has kind of terrified them or has made them lose their balance in some way, that gives you a way in, and it gives you a way to help the person not just to find their balance in relation to the limit situations, but to actually begin to see that all human beings try to escape from the limits, but that actually beginning to face them and work with them and see that they can be a help and give you courage to confront them is an advantage. If this is true, if Jaspers is right, it means that every single client that steps into your consulting room is bringing you something that they see as a problem, but which is actually the beginning of a revelation of how life really is, that they are perfectly capable of welcoming, embracing, and thriving on. That is Jasper's great gift, to understand that. So thank you, Nicole, for bringing that out of that 10-minute exercise. Very well done indeed. And we have Leslie, who will be the second person commenting on what has happened in his group. Go ahead, Leslie.
Thank you. The matter of death and struggle and chance, they're not separate. They all can sometimes come together.
Often.
For many years, I was my wife's carer as her health continued to deteriorate with arthritis and diabetes and constant pain.
Wow.
She died 18 months ago. In the last 6 months of her life, which was very stressful for both of us, and we struggled in every sense of the word. We grieved together and acknowledged her saying, I've had a good life. I've lived my life well. I want now to go. And society says, don't talk like that. We can't help you. Just don't talk about that.
Yeah.
We did.
So you're very alone with it, aren't you?
We shared this together.
How beautiful.
She died in peace with her family there. And there was a sense of completion
Yeah.
and fulfillment.
Yeah.
And then when people started saying to me, I'm sorry for your loss, I said, why are you sorry? And what have I lost? And I believe that to today. I have a new
So
structure.
say that more clearly for us, please, because you've learned such invaluable lessons there. Say it more clearly. When you say, I haven't lost anything, what have you gained and why have you not lost?
Dawn and I lived together in a
Yeah.
faithful relationship for 55 years.
Wow.
We have 2 beautiful children, and we shared our life in a rich and wonderful way.
Yeah.
I gained that sense for me of a life of fulfillment in many ways, which was full of meaning.
Yeah.
And I remember Frankel on one occasion was sent a problem client who no one could help because he was grieving that his wife died.
Yeah.
And Frankel said, what would have happened if you would have died first? And he said, I couldn't bear to think of that. That would have been so terrible. I would have left her on her own. That was the beginning of his recovery.
Yeah. Because he realized that he was living out his life to save his wife from having to be alone.
We celebrated her and honoured her life to the very end, and it came in her time, and unfortunately not in her way, but in nature's way in the end.
Yeah.
And what I have gained from that are just so many wonderful memories which inspire my life to keep going.
This is a wonderful thing. And would you also say, Leslie, that because you have seen it through to the bitter end together, you have, as it were, completed that love, which is now there for you in one piece, always with you.
She will always be my wife.
Yeah.
Before she died, she said, I hope you will find someone else to continue a relationship because I don't want you to be left on your own.
Mm.
I will never get married again because she is my wife and always will be. And
Yeah.
any relationship I engage in will be a different relationship and
Yeah.
will have its own life and potential.
So in a sense, you have ownership of that whole piece of life you have lived together.
Exactly. And that's Frankel's thing about meaning. The meaning associated with her death and her life is it's just amazing.
Well,
Amazing.
I think more people should hear about this, Leslie. I think this is an amazing thing you are sharing with us. And you are the living witness of something that people speak about. And then when we hear about it, we often think, yeah, but who can live it like that? Who actually can live it like that? And it's very hard to live it like that. But you did live it like that, and we need to hear about it.
And I still do.
Did you read the book that Yalom and his late wife wrote while she was dying?
No.
The Yalom and Yalom book. You might be interested in that because they talked about that too. But that has a very different outcome, though, that story of Irv and his wife, because he got remarried, as you may know. And there is something very different that happened there than what you're telling us. And I would really love you to write about this, Leslie.
You can never go backwards. You can never stand in the same river twice because it's never the same river and you are never the same person.
Well, thank you so much. It's very, very precious. Thank you so much. That is most wonderful. I would love to hear more, but we really need to move on because we have less than an hour left, and I'd really love to get to the application. So I'll go back to the slides. I think I have to reshare them with you again, otherwise I'll start to speak to myself again. Can you see them now? Not from the start, play from current slide. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So these are some of the other facts of life that people have to learn to live with, not just death, but also temporality. Exactly what Leslie was saying. You can't step into the same river twice. And gravity. We are sort of stuck to space, thankfully, otherwise we would all fly away. And entropy, the fact that things that we don't keep creating will disappear gradually. And labor, the fact that we have to work for our lives and it's hard work. And illness, it's not just death, but we fall ill and we have to deal with our own weakness and learn to overcome. And failure, the fact that things will go wrong in our lives and we have to find the courage to do them nevertheless or get back to them again. And loss, the fact that we will lose each other and we will lose situations and certain ages of our lives. Everything passes, and then death. So Jasper's message is be aware of these things instead of looking away from these things. Live with that kind of immersion and participation in life and with awareness. Represent the reality of your life to yourself. His philosophy has sometimes been called an existential determinism because it works so much with the givens of life. And it always looks at the limits and the truth of life that are hidden and that provoke anxiety, anguish, and dread. You know, like in that picture, people want to look at the beautiful picture and forget about what has brought that about. So Jasper said, in our day-to-day lives, we often evade these things by closing our eyes and living as if they did not exist. We forget that we must die, forget our guilt, and forget that we are at the mercy of chance. Because these things confront me with the reality of failure. What do I do in the face of this absolute failure, which, if I'm honest, I cannot fail to recognize? As an existential therapist, in the Jaspersian tradition, very much like Frankl, as Leslie was saying, you are in the room with the courage of holding on to these negative polarities of life. And what we learn as we do that is that beyond the limit situations, we find a wholeness of life that once seen is never forgotten, because the limit situations are not the end. They are a frontier, and we can get up to the frontier and look over to the other side. I found, and I say this in the paper, you can find this back in the paper, that, current philosopher Jean-Luc Nancy's work is very relevant to this. In his book, The Fragile Skin of the World, which only came out a few years ago, he kind of poetically elaborates on that idea. And he shows that limits are actually liminal spaces. They are sacred spaces. They take you into a no man's land for a while. And this is true. You know, you feel this about people. We felt it there when we were listening to Leslie speaking about the death of somebody he has loved with his whole soul. And each of us knew, I mean, I felt tearful listening to Leslie. And I'm sure most of you felt that too. It touches us at the depth of our soul, as it were, when we hear that, because we know that we are standing in front of something that is true, something that is profound, something that is sacred. And we know when we meet people who have just lost their mother or their father or their partner, and we feel the love in them and the true grief in them, we know we stand with somebody who is in that liminal space, in a sacred place. And that is your challenge if you work with this from a Jaspersian perspective, to dare to stand in that sacred liminal space with a person where somebody is in the process of discovering how they themselves are transformed by this experience and will never be the same again. Once you have been through that process, you literally hold something about life You know, it has been called having death at your table. It has been described as having that person with you forever, because you understand something about limits being only a question of perspective, and that when you widen your perspective, you can see where those limits are, and you can see that they're actually frontiers, liminal spaces across which there are other countries and other oceans and other things happening at the same time. But most of the time, we just hold on to what we know, and we anxiously avoid those limits and stay clear of those sacred spaces and that depth of understanding. Now, if you want to work in a Jaspersian way, you're going to always approach every session from that position. And that takes a bit of work to get to that place. I speak about that in my paper. I'm not going to read this all out to you, but there is a passage in my paper where I compare this to Kierkegaard's message of the leap of faith, which is about that transformative process where you stop being in control and you realize that, as Jaspers said, the limits are not reductive, but meiotic. You know, that is a Platonic term, which means, in Greek, it means giving birth. So Socrates used to help people give birth to the truth that was already inside of them. This is what Jaspers too tried to do in his work, to help a person give birth to this much greater understanding, which he often called a transcendental understanding of what they were really being initiated to, a kind of mystical way of looking at it, a meiotic way of looking at it. You're giving birth to something new in yourself that transcends the old tensions and conflicts. We heard Leslie do that just 10 minutes ago when he was telling us about how he has kind of gone not just to the threshold of death, but has dared to look beyond it and come back from it, knowing that nothing has been lost and something new has been gained. This is dialectics in motion. Limits are no longer endpoints, but front lines and leading edges, and they take us to new discoveries. This will give your work a whole new quality if you can understand this. This is Jasper's gift, and I think this is why Jaspers isn't being read, because he gets dismissed as too mystical or too unclear, and it isn't scientific enough. Jaspers builds that bridge between a person's suffering and their capacity for transformation. And this is hugely important. So when you do that in relationships, especially in relation to the guilt you have in relation to each other the whole time, Jaspers refers to that as authentic communication and as the loving struggle. And I came to believe that the loving struggle, Jasper's loving struggle, is absolutely the right template for doing existential therapy. And that means daring to be in conflict with your client and daring to let yourself be touched by their plight. Now, before I launch into the case study, there are a couple more concepts I just want to say something about because I used them in that case, is his concepts of the passion for the night and the law of the day. So in German, that is Leidenschaft zur Nacht, which is that which breaks through every order, the way in which I ruin myself in the world in order to become worldless. It's a bit like Heidegger's Unheimlichkeit, which is to be homeless. But Jaspers, talks about being worldless, which is greater than homelessness. It is about breaking through to darkness. It's being in the suffering. And that is opposed to his idea of the Gesetz des Tages, which is the law of the day, which is our obedience to the order of things as human beings have established them. So in your life, there will be an opposition between working along with what society wants from you and the way we look at things normally, on the one hand, and how people have their dark nights of the soul, discovering their limit situations and being introduced to these limits that scare the hell out of them, but that actually, if you have the peace and the confidence to work with them, will help them to transform and be able to work with the struggle, with the loving struggle, where, you know, you are willing to take all these things into account. Jaspers once said, the teacher of love teaches struggle. The teacher of lifeless isolation from the world teaches peace. He did not think peace was the answer. He thought that an awareness that we can comprehend and encompass all these oppositions and all these challenges, that is recognizing that we have the courage and the ability and the strength to be in the struggle. And that is where we learn to be at ease in our lives. And when we do that, that teaches us to live life in a philosophical way, which we heard some of you coming to with the first exercise already. To lead a philosophical life means to take seriously our experience of men, human beings, of happiness and hurt, of success and failure, of the obscure and the confused. It means not to forget, but to possess ourselves inwardly of our experience, not somebody else's. Not to let ourselves be distracted, but to think problems through. Not to take things for granted, but to elucidate them so that they come to light, and that through the ciphers of the things we meet, we are presented with how things actually are, how truth is in evidence in each of our lives. So this is what he says in his book, The Illumination of Existence, about that. This brings you a whole new attitude towards life, and contrary to a life either without solid substance or a life in which this substance is never affected, only this enthusiastic attitude means a life awake, a life in totality and authenticity. Enthusiasm is becoming oneself in the act of devoting oneself, and that devotion is a devotion to all of the limits and to whatever is beyond. And that is, I think I don't have time for all of these things, so I'm going to skip these. I just want one more thing. Yeah, so truth comes out of communication. That is an important point he makes. And truth for Jaspers in the comprehensive sense, in which the truth of the intellect is only one element, is found in existing in this way in which we bring the totality of being into light. We elucidate that. So that is when your existence becomes real. So this is taken from his philosophy. We need each other to do that. Alone, we sink into gloomy isolation, but our connectivity can happen at many different levels. I can't do all these things. We don't have enough time. Let me see. Transcendence. We do need to talk about transcendence because it's pretty vital for Jaspers. So transcendence for Jaspers is that which exists beyond the world of time and space. It is unknown. It is all that is, and no single human being has the truth about transcendence. But Jaspers recognized that subjectivity and objectivity have to come together in transcendence. It is again this dialectical overcoming of both being and nothingness, if you like, of how I experience things and how things look from another perspective. All of that comes together, like in Kierkegaard's leap of faith. So Jaspers has this kind of mystical quality, and he was influenced by Meister Eckhart and Nicholas of Cusa, and also by Buddhism. And he spoke of us going into a new actual age of transformation where we can begin to articulate something about the encompassing in non-religious terms. So it is about the domain of metaphysics and ontology, and it stands in contrast with that which is ontically immanent and mundane and concrete in the world. And to hold both those together is the way to achieve that wholeness. So the encompassing is the source of truth and is distinguished from the objective, the determinate, and the particular forms in which beings confront us. So this was in the back of my mind, working with my client. And of course, all the stuff from his book, The General Psychopathology, is always in my mind, especially his idea about Einfühlung, which is what we've talked about earlier, this participation in your client's plight, instead of saying external to it. So it's about grasping the totality of another person's being and helping them seek their reconnection to the comprehensive, helping them to make sense of their struggle and their struggle for truth in particular. So and you do that by immersing yourself in your client's work. So now my client, so that is Rahim. I don't know how much of the paper you have all read. So he was 42 when I saw him, an Iranian businessman, a refugee in London, had had a tragic experience of having to flee from Iran after his lover Firuz was executed for homosexuality. Well, actually for rape and sodomy. So he physically, so I apply my existential structural system to it, which is sort of inspired by a Jaspersian way of doing things. Average height and weight, seemed supremely confident at the surface, as people sometimes do, elegantly dressed in a very Western way, highly groomed, shaven, backcombed hair, ownership of his space, calm, grace, assurance, manicured fingers, large precious stones on his fingers. That was his presentation. His social space, he was manicured in his manners as well, seemed in control of the relationship, was very formal, steadfast gaze, easy speech, hands posed on the armrest, entitlement to respect, professional status, which he brought forward straight away, spoke about his genetic pedigree, about his aristocratic heritage, about his name, set the scene in all these ways. Then he began to tell me he had always tried to be a good person, was disappointed in himself, had shamed his family, had regrets, felt mortified. So gradually at the personal level, these other things were beginning to come through. Here are his struggles with his limit situations. His life was in danger. He was an asylum seeker, but he retained control of his emotions. It came out as pearls of sweat on his brow. His anxiety was beginning to show. There seemed to be a vibration in him. But his identity was still hidden. It came to the front much more at a spiritual level. How he had lived with social norms, rules, familial duties, but had been torn apart by his homosexuality, which was undeniable and forbidden by his culture. Once was punished with 76 lashes, which, is highly dangerous. Some people take months to get over that. He had studied in the UK previously and had experienced sexual freedom for a while, went back to Iran and fell in love with a friend of the family who had been in his life earlier as well. And they established a clandestine relationship which went on for a while, which felt to him sacred, special, his introduction to love, to something way beyond what he had lived. A passionate commitment to this revolutionized his life. But now this brought tensions and conflict into his life. He did want to do right by his family, who forbade him these things. He wanted to be true to his Islamic upbringing, but this culture and this religion denied him the practice of not just the choice of homosexuality, but felt like denied him to be what he actually was, who he actually was. He was deeply in mourning for Firuz, the person he had loved the most in his life, who had been murdered by the state, hung on a public square with Rahim witnessing his death and shouting out to him in his agony of death, and then having to flee because the morality police was after him. So he loved and hated his father, who had saved him from a similar fate by using his connections in high places to claim that his son had not practiced homosexuality, but had in fact been a victim to this much older man who had seduced him. So Rahim felt terrible guilt because, of course, this was a lie. He had been fully engaged in that relationship, but he had not seen it out to death, which might have been the case had he admitted to that. He was sprung from prison by his father before his case ever went to court. So he lived with terrible, terrible drama, and his transformation from how he had thought of himself as a child, as someone who had, was religiously devout and who was proud of that, to somebody who had discovered that he was different and was, in a way that we can hardly imagine anymore in our societies, was different in a way that was not allowed at all by society, family, or religion. Being, going through the drama and the trauma of the police raid, the imprisonment, and the execution, his fleeing, he was petrified, which is why there was always this sweat purling on his forehead, which was like his fear, not just anxiety, but fear of death constantly with him. So he felt both pride and shame. He felt incredible love for the man he still loved so much, and guilt towards him for having abandoned him in his death, for having even betrayed him. And this was a terrible piece of work in our work together, to work on his betrayal, his liberation from persecution, but then being chained to, the price he had paid for that, and his disappointment in the world and in the people around him who made everything so hard and would not understand him. So I was going to ask you at this point to go into your rooms to think about how this situation affected him, and to allow yourself to feel this deeply. Well, maybe we do have time to do that, to feel that deeply. I don't know that we can get the emotional compass for people to take to their groups, though, Adam, can we? I am not sure. Can I post it anywhere where people have it? Well, maybe it doesn't matter.
The easiest thing is for people to take a picture of it with their phone.
Oh, maybe we don't go into the groups and we do the work in the main group. How's that?
So people can still take a picture. Then they've got
Okay,
it.
take a picture. Yes, take a picture of the emotional compass. I'll just talk about it a little bit to give you a little bit of guidance to work with it. So the emotional compass shows you at the top, these emotions at the top, when you're on a high, exhilaration and happiness, when you are at one with the things you value. Pride and confidence and arrogance is already a way of objectifying what you value, and it already slipping away from you a little bit. Jealousy and worry and vigilance are when you feel it is being taken away from you, and you're still trying to go back to it and hold on to it anxiously. And anger, hate, and despair are what you slip down into when your values are removed from you. And he definitely had some hatred and anger about the situation. But more than that, he was in fear, which is what you sink into when you start to remove yourself from your values and you don't see any chance to hold on to what secures you. then you go into sorrow and misery and eventually resignation when you let go and you allow the loss to take you to rock bottom, and you live through that low of despondency and depression, and you take ownership of the depth of life, which is where the limit situation becomes real. And from there on, trying to make a life again, you have a feeling of emptiness at first, and that may translate into shame or guilt for things you cannot be or cannot do, or things that you did wrong to get to this place. Then you may have a sense of returning curiosity and a sense of envy for others, and that tells you how you might find something new in life that leads you to the feelings of hope and new desires, a sense of resolution, where you have a new value, maybe a bigger value, a value that has transcended the previous values that were lost. This is about, the transcendence that Jaspers speaks about. And when you do that, you come to the possibility of loving in a bigger way, with courage and commitment, of holding on to the contradictions of life, which then brings you to a high at a much greater level of understanding than where you started to lose something in the first place. So if you've taken pictures of it, you can take it with you. Let's just have the 10 minutes again in your small groups and see how you might now allow yourself to feel into Rahim's difficulties and how you might have worked with that yourself, or how that affects you. Do with it what you wish. See you in 10 minutes. The train is coming into the station. So funny that there's only like one group coming back initially. And then there's a
Press the
pause. There's
button.
another.
Hmm.
Here we come.
Here we
There
go.
we are. We're all back together again. Isn't that marvelous, the way that works? Can there be an easier way to suddenly be all back together in one room? Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, I'll be very curious to hear what you made of that. I am aware we only have 10 minutes left, so regrettably, I won't be able to give you all the other slides, but I'm very happy to share the slides with Alison so that she can share them with you all, so you can have fun looking through them and seeing all the things we haven't had time to discuss. And hopefully that will take you back to reading some Jaspers. Start with The Way to Wisdom, most easy to obtain, cheapest to obtain. It has a lot of this in it. But you can look at my book, Everyday Mysteries, which has this sort of conversation about Jaspers in it. And there's a bit in it in the Wiley World Handbook as well. I also noticed that Xenia very helpfully has posted a copy of the Emotional Compass in the chat, so you can copy it from there, so you can use it from there. So thank you, Xenia, for that. And now I'd like to invite you to give some feedback to what you came up with. How did you apply these ideas in that 10-minute session with each other in relation to Rahim's plight, and maybe in relation to yourself as a therapist or as a person, anything at all, really, a kind of summing up. Who is going to be one of our summing up voices? Don't be shy. Jackie, I think you're saying you, yes? Go ahead.
In our group, one of the things we touched on was how Rahim maybe wasn't aware of his limits, but he wasn't aware of the limits of his lover either, because it appeared his lover had much more powerful limits when it came to being in that position that they were in. I mean, to go to around, to be part of something like that, knowing that it is death if you're caught, it's like a confronting, very confronting. I found that, but it's
A
like
very interesting remark. That
Mm.
was definitely something about defying reality and defying the law and defying, you know, the law of the day that had always been so important in his life. And he was in a kind of self-deceptive state, he came to realize. He came to believe that he was in a different place when he was with Firuz, that they were in a sort of nighttime together, that nobody would ever know about it, and that they had discovered this perfect alternative universe that they would get away with, you know, living in paradise together ever after, sort of thing. And when reality came back, suddenly it went so fast that he didn't know how to deal with it. And he was very ashamed that his response was to go with his father's suggestion to be lying about it, basically, to save his skin. And that was probably the biggest point of guilt and shame for him. But it was also what had saved his life. So that made his life then more precious. And he discovered really that it was in facing up to the fact that he did still love Firuz, and that it was the place where he felt closest to God, which was a very difficult thing for him to acknowledge, that he came to realize that it was only in living his life in a way that was true to that love that he could redeem himself in any kind of way. It was very much about a search for a new way of transcending all these things than to just be sunk into transcendence always being about Islam, the Islamic view of it, or the family view of it, or the Iranian view of it. He had to find a way to stand with what his God was about, which in his view was love. So it was an incredible path we were on, because I had to discover some of that. I did not know a lot of that stuff. He taught me a lot about Islam and how he had to find a way to bring together his true being and his transcendental being in his religion. It was really a huge challenge for me as well as for him, but incredibly worthwhile. It really felt like being with him in that loving struggle. Yeah. Quite anxious making sometimes. If you're interested in that, the handbook, the Wiley World Handbook, I have a chapter with Claire Arnold Baker where she supervises me as I'm doing my work with what's his name, Rahim, who of course wasn't really called Rahim at all. And so there are lots more details there if you're interested to see how I found my way through that, really that maze of difficulties that he was dealing with in himself and in relation to everybody in his life, really everything and everybody in his life. It was
We've
on
got
a
a,
knife's edge the whole time.
we've got a copy of that from another workshop that you did, I think. So we could send that with the slides.
Oh, you have that of that
Yeah,
article.
I
Oh,
think,
fantastic, Alison.
yeah, I'm sure I have somewhere. Yeah.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Well, and if not, I could send you a
Yeah.
copy of the
I think I'm
Yeah,
sure
okay,
I
we'll
think,
do that.
yeah. Mm.
Right. Any other summing up in the last few minutes? Adam, you were saying some very interesting things in our time together. Did you want to share that? Not specifically about your client, but, you know, your understanding of how it helps to look at things in this different way from that more transcendental perspective. We can't hear you.
That'd be good. How's that? Rather than get into that particular client we were just sort of briefly talking about, I think I was saying some of these ideas around, at least from my own perspective, that life is a struggle. And when we start to bring those 5 concepts of death, struggle, chance, suffering, and guilt, how that could be really encapsulated in all of our clients, and widening that lens of inquiry would be something that sits well with me because it's coming from my own particular worldview and my own sort of belief system there, given my background. So there's something around the edginess of that is quite exciting for me, and going into that liminal space and those limitations and that potential for transcendence beyond that struggle is something that's quite exciting for me. I guess that's where I'm sitting from a broader sort of commentary.
Yeah, thank you. That's such a lovely comment. I'm sure Jaspers would have just loved to hear you saying that. And I feel in a way, when Alison asked me, you know, could I present a philosopher? And I thought, well, who? I immediately thought, you know, the obvious, either Heidegger or Sartre, but she already had Heidegger. So I thought, well, Sartre then, who I know incredibly well. And then I suddenly thought, no, I've just done this paper on Jaspers, and he deserves to be better known. And there is so much richness in his work that is going to waste. And it felt important to bring him to you today. So I hope that has given you something new to think about and something to work with for yourself and with your clients. So I think we'll have to bring it to a conclusion there. I won't go back into the slides to bring that out, but you can see that for yourself when you get a copy of the slides, which Alison will remind me to send to her. I say goodbye to you all.
Thank you very much,
for coming
Emmy.
Thanks,
today.
Emmy. Thank you.
Thank you so
Oh no,
much.
it's the end.
Thank you.
Thank you.